Are You Being Served is the 22nd episode of the 4th season of Frasier, and this is directed by Gordon Hunt. And as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a very funny episode. I laughed a lot out loud, and I'm not somebody who laughs out loud that much, but occasionally it happens. Usually with Frasier and Cheers, and when it does happen, I'm very happy. This is a different viewing experience this time for me because I could remember very vividly, I guess, the spoiler detail in this. As I said, there will be spoilers from now, so I can talk a little bit about this, and I'll talk more in detail when we get there, but I could remember who Frasier and Niles were, and it's a different experience. But even though I knew the spoiler, I still had a lot of fun with it. Maybe even more so because I had the background context. I don't know. Either way, really thoroughly enjoyed it. It starts off with KCL. Frasier is saying goodbye to the chef Leo, planning on going to the party. He doesn't like hugging, but he ends up having to hug him because everybody else does. And it's such an accurate, uncomfortable situation. If you're with a group of people and everybody else is hugging goodbye and you're the only one who isn't, you kind of have to do it, otherwise you look really cold. And I'm not really a hugger, necessarily. With some people, and in some contexts, yes. But I definitely felt for Frasier in that moment. We then are at KCL. They're talking about Maris. Niles has a really good feeling about the future of their relationship. And then he's served divorce papers. And that's definitely not what Niles was expecting, but I think based on how long they've been separated and the way Maris has been acting and behaving, I don't think it's that unusual. We're then at the apartment and Daphne is running around with this box, and then Martin comes in and he then calls Eddie in from his walk, and Eddie looks absolutely adorable in his little outfit. Mrs. Foster had knitted him an outfit and Martin saw her, so when they were going to the park he thought, well, I'd better make the effort to put Eddie in the outfit at least once. Turns out she wasn't at the park, but Duke was, and Martin also Martin wore the matching hat, which was just really delightful. And it turns out that this box that Daphne was trying to hide from him was a box of what she considers to be his junk. I'll be honest, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because Daphne doesn't really have any right to be boxing up his possessions and putting them out of the apartment. I don't understand the logic behind that, or why she thought it was something she had the right to do. I can overlook it. The rest of the episode is amazing, but it just felt a little bit unbelievable. We do get a lot of comedy out of it, though, and we'll come back to some of the comedy in a little bit. Niles then comes over, and he and Frasier find a journal with his mother's handwriting, and it's one of her research journals, and they start to read out a bit from it, and there are a couple of times that I'll quote it. On this occasion, Frasier reads out, "It's hard to imagine two male siblings who could be more different than Frasier and Niles. Although both are highly intelligent, Frasier is clearly the more dominant of the two, while Niles remains extremely passive." And obviously, she's writing about her young children, one would assume. This is a fair assumption. And it's really quite fascinating because they start to connect with things that their mother is writing about. Frasier thinks, yes, this is an accurate representation of me. Niles thinks the same. And it's because of that that Niles starts to question his behaviours. And it's the driving force behind some of his actions throughout the episode. We do have a sweet moment where Frasier says to him, "I don't think I've ever been more proud of you." And then Frasier practices his hugging. It's awkward, but it's sweet. They then go over to Maris's, and they're going there to get the letter back that Niles had sent with the unsigned divorce papers. And it seems like they will easily go in, grab the letter, and leave. But it turns out, as Niles says, she hasn't changed the locks, she's changed the dogs. The guard dogs are not the dogs that Niles was fond of, and the dogs who were fond of Niles. So they have to find a way to try and get out of the house without being mauled by the dogs. And Niles ends up throwing meatballs down laced with Maris's pills. And Frasier just shouting up to Niles was very funny, really brilliant performance. And we have this brilliant quote from Niles, and it's a really strong, well, it's a strong turning point, but it's temporary. And we'll come back to that towards the end of the episode, where Niles says, "This entire room is a monument to my spinelessness." And he starts to look at things in the room and how they're just examples of how Maris controlled everything and how his desires and wishes meant absolutely nothing. And he ends up signing the divorce papers. And Frasier said, I will support you in anything that you do, but are you sure about this? And Niles says, absolutely. And there was something about the delivery of that line that I really, truly believed. And then he does something in a moment that I didn't like. It felt like a backward step, but we'll get to that in a second. They then go back to the apartment, and Niles is briefly in good spirits. But then he starts to panic because he realizes he's signed the divorce papers. And Frasier says, let's remind us of why you did this. And he picks up his mother's journal, trying to read something out of it to remind Niles about what they'd discovered about themselves, or I guess what they were what was reinforced about them. And he picks up the journal and he reads, as I write this, he lies staring out of the window, licking himself. He's become so subservient lately that when he's finished grooming himself, he often begins licking Frasier. And Niles responds, I have no memory of that. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And then the next entry, Frasier died this morning. And Frasier realizes their mother named them after lab rats, which in itself is very, very funny. And Niles realizes he's just signed divorce papers because of something he read about lab rats. Obviously, it's not as black and white as that, but he starts to panic. He goes into the bathroom to splash water on his face, and we hear this bang. And Frasier obviously assumes that Niles has shot himself. That's what it sounded like, and Frasier begins to panic, not necessarily thinking things through, because why would he have a gun? Why would there be a gun in the bathroom? I don't know. But he then opens the door, and Niles is just covered head to toe in the shaving foam from Martin's gadget that was in the box that Daphne was trying to get rid of. And the brief exchange with Martin and Daphne I thought was fabulous. Martin says, my hot and foamy must have exploded. And Daphne replies, he was a detective, you know, which I loved. I thought it was fabulous. And unfortunately, at that moment, Niles is standing there covered in foam, and his phone rings, and it's Maris, and she didn't think he'd signed the divorce papers, and it's kind of thrown her, so she's willing to go through with the counselling. And I don't like that. I don't like the fact that Niles was then happy about that, because when he said absolutely, it was almost like he'd turned a corner, a really significant corner, and now he's backstepping. In reality, do I think he should say no to counselling? No, I guess not. In reality, if this were a real situation, I would say, give your marriage a chance, go to counselling. It's clearly what you want. But within the context of the episode, I don't want Niles to take a backward step. We know Maris is not good for Niles. We know she treats him like garbage. And I don't want him to try and work things out with her. So I don't like it. I don't particularly care for that part of the episode. But the rest of it is fantastic. And we end with Eddie getting his little outfit out of the box, which is very, very cute. Solid episode. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Highlights would have to be, I guess, them finding out about the lab rats. And also the meatballs. I don't know why, but I just found Frasier's response to Niles throwing the meatballs to be very, very funny. And yeah, Martin saying my hot and foamy must have exploded, and Daphne saying he was a detective. You know, I really liked that. My delivery does no justice, but it's very funny. Brilliant episode. Really thoroughly enjoyed it. Don't love Niles' happiness at the end with Maris deciding to go to counselling. But other than that, I'd have to say, Are You Being Served is a pretty brilliant episode of Frasier.